Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Center for Spiritual Living, Victoria Online. My name is Reverend Carrie Hunter, and I'm the Senior Minister at the CSL Victoria. And if you happen to live in this city and you'd like to join us in person on Sundays, we're located at 380 Cook Street. And if you just happen to be joining in online again, then welcome back. It's lovely to see you here with us today. And I'm continuing my talk on a series where we are really seeking to find God. And today, my talk is entitled "God as Me." The thing is that we're all on a search, and there are so many different religions, so many different faiths, and it gets disconcerting because as we're on this search, we're really searching for inner truth, for inner wisdom. And I came across a funny joke the other day that has been considered to be the best all-time religious joke. And I think there's merit to that. But also, there's a certain sadness to it because of the truth that is in it. And I'm going to have to read part of it to you because it gets very complex for me to remember. But it starts out with a man who's about to jump off a bridge, and another man stops his car and runs over to save him. And the man says, "No, no, no, I'm going to jump. Nobody loves me. Nobody loves me." And the other man said, "Well, God loves you. Do you believe in God?" And he said, "Oh, yes, I believe in God." And he said, "So are you a Christian or a Jew?" And the man says, "I'm Christian." And so he says, "So what denomination are you?" And he said, "Well, I'm Protestant." And so he said, "Okay, you're Protestant. So what denomination?" And he said, "Well, I'm a Baptist." And the man said, "Oh, I'm a Baptist too." And he said, "Are you a Northern Baptist or a Southern Baptist?" And the man says, "I'm a Northern Baptist." And he says, "Are you a Northern Conservative Baptist or are you a Great Lakes Conservative Baptist?" And he says, "I'm a Great Lakes Conservative Baptist." And he says, "Me too." And so from there, it goes to, are you a Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1879 or a Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912? And the man who's about to jump says, "I'm a Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Regional Council of 1912. And the other guy says, "Die, heretic," and pushes him off the bridge. The sadness of that, of course, is that so many people are absolutely wed to some specific religion and to a certain kind of dogma and don't have tolerance for others. And what we're looking for here is we're looking for God in everyone, in everything. We're looking for God that everyone can understand. We're looking for spiritual truth. We're looking for a faith that embraces all people everywhere, where there is no judgment. And it's that judgment thing that often gets in the way of our reaching our highest potential spiritually. And so as we're seeking, the story is, as we're seeking for God, that the longest journey we're going to take on any path that we're on is the pathway from our head to our heart, which is about 18 inches. That basically we're out there looking for God somewhere out there, when in fact the God of our being, this great wisdom, this great truth, this intelligence, whatever it is that you want to call it, it doesn't matter, but it's there within us. It's in our own hearts, and we forget about that, and that gets us into a whole lot of trouble sometimes. So we need to remember that all roads lead to God, but we need to have consciousness and self-awareness before anything else. Churches aren't going to give us that. Going to church on Sunday alone is not going to make us self-aware, is not going to give us the consciousness that we need, and is probably not going to give us the awareness of God that we need in our lives. We need to be searching and finding our way along that path every day, and monitoring our thoughts, monitoring our ideas, so that we can can find the truth that is within us. And Deepak Chopra says that seeking God is like a thirsty fish trying to find a drink of water. You know, God is everywhere around us. The water is everywhere around the fish. And yet, because we're just so accustomed to the air that we breathe, to the scenery that's around us, the material world, just as the fish is so absolutely, taking for granted the water that is around it, we're not aware of where the truth really, 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 really lives. You know, it's like we kind of like to have an X-ray so that we could find God. Wouldn't it be wonderful if there were an X-ray that could just reveal that to us? I remember many years ago, and I was very young, many years ago, reading an article in Time magazine, and it was actually a cover story that there is a flame within the heart that is God. And as I consider that now, I think, what an extraordinary thing that was in Time magazine at the time. And I believe that the research that was being done was at Oxford University in the UK. But such an unusual story to find, and I don't even remember the substance of it all. Just at the time that I read it, I was so excited. And I hadn't yet entered the New Thought teachings. And so I was pondering this and trying to figure out how that could be and how it could be hidden and how I could access it. How could I access this God that was a flame in my heart? And perhaps that was a metaphor for God at the time. I really don't remember. But in recent years, I've come to love the teachings and the books by Greg Braden and Bruce Lipton and Joe Dispenza. And a couple of years ago, I was doing a series of talks that were based upon a book by Bruce or by Greg Braden. And he was being interviewed by someone on radio one day. And the fellow on radio said, wouldn't you think that God would leave some kind of evidence somewhere, some kind of evidence that he, it, she exists? And Greg Braden said that when asked that question, he just had chills because this was something that he was about to write about. And he wanted to know that he was getting it really right. And he didn't really respond to the question, but basically he said in his book, God has left a calling card. There's a calling card in each one of us, and it is the same calling card for each of us. And he went on to explain that when he was at St. Catherine's retreat on Mount Sinai, that he studied ancient manuscripts. And when he was studying Hebrew manuscripts, he learned that there wasn't a name for God, that wherever the name for God or wherever God should appear in the texts, there would just be a ... And he learned that in Judaism, that in synagogues, that the name God is only spoken once each year. The rest of the time, it is the name that shall not be spoken, that cannot be spoken. And he said that the letters for the name of God were YVHH. Now, in the Hebrew tradition, there are no vowels in the language. And so wherever there's a consonant, there are numbers that go with the consonant so that one can determine some degree of pronunciation of what would come after that letter, depending upon the number. And he said that as he studied this, he said, of course, in the Jewish tradition, the name for God is Yahweh, or that was as close as they could come to it for giving God a name. But he said the amazing thing is when he began to study YVHH, not in the English language, but in Hebrew, and then translated the Hebrew letters into English, he discovered that the Hebrew letters in English represented the elements of our DNA. And he said he found that God did leave that calling card, that God is in the elements of our DNA. Imagine that. God is everywhere within us, absolutely everywhere. And the evidence is there. And it boggles the mind, absolutely boggles the mind, to think about something like that. And that's why I love his work, and I love the work of these teachers who are bringing science and religion together in this day. Something that we really need to consider, because in many recent years it's just been science that people have been looking at, and it's made a lot of people turn away from God because they just can't figure it out. They can't figure out how they can reconcile science with God. But in fact, these amazing teachers are doing just that. And so I found that in my own experience as a little child, I went to different churches and Sunday schools all the time. We moved very frequently. And the first thing I would do would be to look for a church or a Sunday school. And I never knew what the tradition was, what the faith was. I just attended. And none of the dogma ever really stuck to me. But I was seeking from a very early age. I was looking for God, and I had really deep, warm, loving feelings for God. But I didn't really understand it. I mean, to me, God was that old man in the sky that we were taught about when we were little, and that many teachers and many traditions are still teaching about today. So I was seeking, and when I found Science of Mind, I finally found a God I could understand. An intelligence, a wisdom, a truth, a love, a joy that is everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. It's in everyone and everything. There's no place that I can look where God is not. There's nothing I can feel about that does not contain God in some way. And I had a little grandson, have a grandson who's now not so little. But when I was a student minister, getting into these studies, because all of a sudden it was my passion, I wanted to know more and more. He phoned me one Sunday morning when he was 4 years old, and he asked me what I was doing. And I said, well, actually, I don't have a lot of time to talk, sweetie, because I'm just getting ready to go to church. And he said, you go to church? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, churches are bad. They don't tell the truth about God. And I said, well, I'm going to become a minister, and I'm really into my studies now. And he said, oh, well, if you're going to be a minister, I would go to your church, because I know you would never lie about God. And I laughed, and I said to him, I promise you that as long as I live, I will tell the truth about God as much as I know it to be. And he was satisfied with that. Now, he was an unusual little kid. He talked about God all the time. He talked about spirit guides. He talked about past lives. He was just filled with all of this stuff until he got to an age where all of a sudden he just forgot. He forgot overnight. But I loved that as a little child, he was way beyond traditional religion. He was way beyond that. He was in touch with a God that he couldn't quite describe, except that he knew that we weren't describing it very accurately. And so, knowing that there's this calling card within us, that helps us so much. It helps us in so many ways to understand that there is something so much greater than our physical forms. Perhaps that is the soul. Perhaps it is spirit. It's that part of us from which we came, the part where we live our lives in physical form, and where we go back to when we unzip this physical garment and step into another reality, into the real reality, possibly. There have been millions and millions and millions of books written about God, and there are so many different spins on it. And it's no wonder that there's such a struggle to really, really understand. So last week when I was talking about finding God, I quoted Rumi, and one of his quotes that I dearly love is that when I lie down in the grass, or when my soul lies down in the grass, the world has no words. And I think that's where we need to go. We need to go to that place where we know that as much as we try to describe God, as much as I do, as much as I talk about this entity, this being, this intelligence, there really aren't sufficient words to describe it. Perhaps we shouldn't be speaking the name of God every day of the year. Perhaps we should be feeling it instead, just being inside ourselves. You know, in moments of divine inspiration, when I really feel that presence, when I have a message, an intuitive thought about something that I need to do, I look at my life and I just say, fancy meeting me here. And I kind of laugh when I say that because I actually dreamed that one night, and it has become the title for a book that I'm writing. But as we're in this place, in what Deepak Chopra calls the subtle place, we're in the material world, but at the same time, we're beginning to follow our intuition. We know that we have greater insight into things. When we're in that place, we begin self-examination. We begin to ask ourselves, just what is our story? What is your story? What's the story that's sticking to you from childhood or at some point in your life where things didn't go so well? What's the story that you want to keep repeating? What's my story that I want to keep repeating that keeps me from being the best that I can be? The thing is that we need to ask ourselves the question, can we do anything? Absolutely anything. If we recognize that God is within us, this power is within us, that is there for us to use. As Ernest Holmes says, there's a power for good in the universe, and you can use it. So it's there for us to use. What is this? What is it that is holding us back? We need to see beyond our limited selves. We need to look for the greater idea. And it takes courage. It takes courage to move beyond our old ideas. It takes courage to give up our stories and to start fresh, knowing that right here and right now, I can change anything in my life that I want to change. But it also means examining the things that have limited our thoughts. Have we felt that we're not good enough? Have we felt that we don't have enough money? Have we felt that we're not loved enough? That we're not in the right relationship? We're not living in the right place? There's so many false ideas that we have about ourselves. And how do we look at people who are really happy? And how do we look at people who have lots of money? That's always a wonderful test about how we really feel about our lives, and about how we feel about people who have lots of money. I think it's great if people have lots of money. Consider this. Imagine that there's a woman who just passed away and was a billionaire, a self-made billionaire. And she had every single advantage that you could imagine in her adult years. And she found a beautiful piece of land, 175 acres of land on a lake, beautiful, peaceful lake. And so she decided to build herself a home there, a mansion. And there were 40 rooms in the mansion. 40 rooms. And she lived alone, except for her staff, which came and went. And imagine that she had her own private jet, and that she would phone a dear friend from time to time and say, hey, I'm firing up the jet. Would you like to come to Mexico with me for a week? And we'll take the yacht out and go out on the yacht and go sailing. And we'll invite some prominent people to come and stay with us and have wonderful conversation, have a wonderful time. Or imagine that every year that she would line up a dozen of her friends and take them to to a wonderful festival somewhere, put them up in the best hotel ever and pay for everything and just have a wonderful time. And that money was no object, that when she threw a party at her 40-room estate, she would have the local symphony orchestra come and play at the party. And there would be amazing food and entertainment and, political people who were really well known and celebrities who were well known. We could look at those kinds of things and think, what excess? How could anybody use that amount of money? What would they do with it? And this is a thing about our consciousness, and we can test our consciousness in every area of our lives in terms of money, in relationships, in the work that we do, whatever. How does it stack up against other people? When we start comparing ourselves to a billionaire or a multi-billionaire, how are we feeling about that? Well, I'd like to share something with you. There's a wonderful woman named Crystal DeHaan who passed away a few weeks ago. She was 77 years old, and she was the dearest of friends to a very dear friend of mine who lives in the U.S. Crystal was that billionaire. And the remarkable thing about her is that she was born in Germany, and when her father died in the war, and she decided when she was 16 years of age to move to England, and in London she was a nanny for a family there. And she saved her money, and she moved to the United States. And in order to survive, she took in ironing. She did laundry for people. She ironed clothes. And then she set up a little ironing business where she hired other people to help with ironing as well. And then she set up a typing pool where she had women who would type documents for those who couldn't type. And her business grew and grew, as did she. And then she founded RCI Resorts, huge international timeshare resort operation, which she managed for many, many years. And she sold that a few years ago for $850 million. A lot of money. She had offices in 30 countries in the world at that time. It's extraordinary. And so she didn't just rest on her laurels, on the money that she made from the sale of the resorts and the money that she amassed before the sale of the resorts and the investments. As Oprah Winfrey said, once you hit $750 million, when she did, she said, you can't spend your money. There's no way. She said, it just keeps making more and more and more money. You can't spend it. So then you have to determine what you're going to do with it. And she said, I'm everything I was without money, but more so. And so looking at Crystal's life, this remarkable woman, once she retired from RCI, she set up a foundation. I think it was called the Crystal Foundation, but I'm not 100% certain if that's the full name. And she built schools all over the world in developing countries, schools for girls, schools that would provide health care and education for them and would change their lives. And before she passed, she said to my friend that she wanted to do that for First Nations people in North America as well. She gave $250 million to the arts. $250 million. She spent millions and millions to help children around the world. And her foundation now has all of that money and will continue her work. She left $5 million to each of her children and her grandchildren because she said, if they can't make it on that, then, what's the point? And all the rest of her wealth has gone to charity. Don't we start looking at somebody in a totally different way when they have a lot of money and when they use it for the greater good? What would you do? What would you do if you had that much money? What would you do if you had a life that was that large? When Crystal passed, she had 4,000 employees who were looking after these children and looking after her affairs, making the world a better world. Isn't that something that we would all like to do? And maybe we wouldn't want the concern of having that amount of money and what to do with it. And it's not really about the money at all. It's about how would we want to live our lives, or how do we want to live our lives from this point forward? How do we want to serve? How do we want to give the very best of ourselves? And it doesn't mean that we have to have any money at all. It could go to the Salvation Army and volunteer. can do community work, can do volunteer work in your church, in your centers. There are so many things that we can do with or without great wealth. It's for us to decide, and there's no judgment anywhere about how big or small the project might be. It is simply, are we fulfilling a purpose here on this earth? And we need to understand that it is never, ever too late, because we have this power within us. So we can start at any time, anywhere. I think it was Norman Vincent Peale who said, "When God is with me, nothing can be against me." So consider that. When God is with you, nothing can be against you, because God is always with you. And so it is only ourselves, it's only our own minds, it's only our own thoughts that can make anything be against us. We need to clean up our thoughts. We need to be in a positive frame of mind. We need to understand that with this power we can accomplish great things in our lives. And those great things don't have to be enormous. They can be, as I said, simple things like volunteering somewhere. It means showing our love for humanity, showing our love for our fellow humans, being forgiving, being compassionate, being understanding, spreading our love all over the world, and contemplating the divine that is within us. If God is with us, nothing can be against us. God as you, God as me. God is everything we are. God is everything that is. And so we are blessed. Let us make the most of our lives, starting right here, right now, in this moment. And so it is. I thank you for being with me today, and I welcome you to go to our website, www.cslvictoria.org, if you're not already on that, and to make a donation to us. It's what keeps our center thriving through the most difficult of times. We're so grateful for everything that you do for us. If you prefer to send a check, you'll find our address there. Or if you'd like to send an e-transfer, please send it to welcome@cslvictoria.org. Thank you so much for being who you are. Thank you for the blessing that you are to the world. Don't ever forget that. You were born a blessing to the world, and you have the power within you to just do absolutely anything that that you're passionate about, anything that is going to contribute to the good of all humanity. And I hope to see you here next week, or else in our physical center on Cook Street. Thank you again for being with us. And so it is. Bye for now.